Living on just dividends in retirement sounds like a dream, right? It sounds like it is the perfect thing to do. You never have to touch your principal. You have a consistent stream of income coming in, and that comes in passively no matter what you do, right? It sounds like a dream. However, I'm here to ruin your dream and tell you why relying solely on dividends in retirement, especially early retirement, is probably not a good idea. And I've got some pretty good reasons on why that is. Hello everyone, my name is Zach and welcome to On Cash Flow, where I help you become a master of your own cash flow. Now let's get started. The first reason that I have for you is that the dividend yield, it can change, and sometimes it can change quite drastically. So here's an example I have for you. Most of us, if you're probably watching this channel, then you probably invest in index funds, all right? And even if you don't, a lot of people invest in index funds. And so for my example here, I'm gonna use the S&P 500 index fund. And more specifically, I'm gonna be using one from Vanguard, V.F.I.R.E, okay? So that's like their OG S&P 500. And so you can see from the last 20 years, the dividend yield for V.F.I.R.E or the S&P 500 has varied anywhere from 0.44% all the way to 4.05%. You don't need me to tell you that that is a dramatic difference. That, range of dividend yield is very, very dramatic. So that means that your dividends aren't necessarily going to be as consistent as you think based off of that dividend yield. Now, of course, that is just for the S&P 500, but again, like I said, also, a lot of us do invest in index funds. We know that index funds are probably one of the best investments that we can make as individual investors. But there's more, and more is number two. Number two, not just the dividend yield, but the actual amount of dividends paid can change somewhat drastically as well. Again, I'm going to go back to the S&P 500 using VFIAX because the data is readily available for that. And if we have, let's say, $1 million invested in that fund, through the past 20 years, that's where we started with $1 million, and we are just trying to live off the dividends of what income it produces, then you can see on the chart there that the amount of actual dividends paid is going to vary year to year, okay, somewhat drastically. So here's the most drastic change, and that was between 2008 and 2009. So we all know what happened there. Hopefully we all know. But between 2008 and 2009, this is what happened to the dividends. So they dropped from $21,285 per year to an average of $18,077 in that next year. That is a $3,208 drop, and that results in about a 15% drop in your income. So if you were relying solely on dividends, then you saw a 15% decrease in your income from 2008 to 2009. This is one of the big reasons why I think that just using the 4% rule, or even less than that, like if you're using 3.75%, 3.5%, 3%, anywhere from 3 to 4%, you're probably going to be good because that already takes into account market volatility. It already takes into account that you can continue withdrawing the same amount and even adjust upward for inflation if you're using that withdrawal rule for your investments. But if you're just using dividends, then you're at the mercy of whatever the market is and whatever the dividend yield is and how much actual dividends you're going to get. So for this example, you could have lost 15%. But I do have to admit that even between 2008 and 2009, even between a pretty bad market decline and a pretty bad decline in your dividends, 15% isn't actually all that crazy or undoable if you're retired, especially if you're retired early and you built your budget correctly to where you have a lot of discretionary spending in your budget. Obviously, if you see a very large market decline and you're living off your investments, most likely you're going to just reduce your spending somewhat based on that market decline, even if you don't technically have to based on the 4% rule. So common sense is probably going to tell us that we're probably going to reduce our spending just a little bit, and 15% I think is very, very doable. So I do have to admit that. Later on, I'm going to tell you about another video by someone else, another YouTube creator that created a video similar to this where they talk about living off of dividends is not a good idea in retirement, and I really do want to share that with you because I think that they go into a lot more detail than I'm going to on this video, so stay tuned for that. But the next point that I want to make is point number 3, and point number 3 is that if you focus on dividends, if you just focused on getting a large amount of dividends, then you might be sacrificing total returns. You might be getting inferior returns if you're focusing on dividends rather than the total return of your portfolio. So that could be a problem if you're trying to live off of your dividends. Total returns are technically more important than your dividend yield, okay? And going after just dividend yield could actually possibly lead you to make some pretty bad investments. Now, here's another thing that I was actually pretty surprised when it comes to actually going after dividends, and that is the Vanguard Dividend Growth Fund. So what I did is I went and I compared the Vanguard Dividend Growth Fund to the Vanguard S&P 500, and I went and just saw how they did over the past 20 years. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by the actual dividend growth fund. Now, that's not to say that I think it's a better investment than investing in index funds. It's just that I was surprised that it didn't do as bad as I originally would have thought it did. So it looks like this particular fund actually gained you pretty close when it comes to total returns, but it had like vastly lower actual volatility when it comes to gaining those returns. So the dividend growth fund had a lot less volatility and almost as good total returns as the S&P 500 index fund. However, that is to say that we have no idea if that's going to continue to be the case for the next 20 years, for the next 30 years, for the next 40 years, okay? I can't read the future and you probably can't either, or else you wouldn't need to be watching this video. Since we don't know the future, we don't know if that is going to continue to do as well as the S&P 500. We don't know if it's going to outperform, underperform, or whatever. But based on the historical data in the past 20 years, it did do pretty well and it had a lot less volatility. So that is something I do have to admit to the people going after the dividends. They have had some pretty good returns in the past 20 years, at least for this particular dividend growth fund. One thing I do want to note there is that actual dividend growth fund from Vanguard, they only have 42 stocks in their investment portfolio currently, and the S&P 500 obviously has 500 stocks. Well, actually over that, it has 507 stocks currently. So there is some, diversification issues there, but also there is the problem of this being a passive versus active fund kind of thing. So that dividend growth fund is being selected by an account manager, and as we know historically, most actively managed mutual funds fail to outperform their index benchmark. However, did you know that there is something that pays huge dividends that you might not even be aware of? And that is the like button on this video. So please hit that like button if you're enjoying this video so far, because we've got a really good juicy one coming up. Coming up next, we have a really good one. So hit that like button really quick. Let's get it over with. Thank you so much. I would really appreciate that. But the next one is number 4. And the reason number 4 on the dividends is not so good in retirement kind of discussion we're having here is that there is the free dividend fallacy. This is a really cool one, okay? So I never really thought about this one until I actually learned it from Berger, okay? The guy I'm gonna be talking about in just a minute. The free dividend fallacy basically says that these dividends are not coming out of nowhere. Dividends are not free money, okay? They are coming from somewhere. And specifically, they're coming from the value of the company that you own, right? So in this case, what a dividend is, so a company has some extra cash that they're willing to give to the investors, all right, to keep them happy. And because the company doesn't think that they can use that cash in a more effective way to increase their share price. So what actually happens when they pay out that dividend, or it might not be specifically when they pay it, I think it's when they announce it, but that doesn't really matter. That's the minutia here. So when they actually pay out those dividends, it reduces their stock price because it reduces the value of their stock because they no longer have that asset, that cash asset. They're actually, passing it on to the investors and it's gone. You might not notice this because it actually like very, very small in most circumstances. So the stock is usually gonna take the very, very short, small dip and it's gonna go back up because people want those dividends. And so that might actually cause the stock price to go up because people are after those dividends. And so they value that. That is a good thing for that company. But technically the money does not come from nowhere. It's almost like a forced way of selling off some of your shares, selling off some of your value. But the company is making that decision for you. So instead of you deciding to sell off a little bit of your shares to gain some money, the company is like, we're gonna sell off some of your shares to give you money. But they're not actually selling any shares. They're just reducing the value of their company by deploying that cash and giving it away to the investors. Seriously though, look up the free dividend fallacy. It's pretty crazy because people do believe this. People do think that dividends just come from the sky and they're just magic money that wasn't included already in the value of the share price. But the dividends are tied to the share price or the value of the company. Really quick, I want to know from you in the comments below. Let's discuss some cool stuff here. Do you plan on living off of your dividends, or are dividends a really big part of your retirement strategy? How big of a role do those play in your personal retirement, your financial independence? I really want to know from you in the comments below. But I do have another really good reason for you on why you should not just rely solely on dividends, and that is number 5. And reason number 5 is very different from the last few of them, the last 4. So reason number 5 is that it could lead you to over accumulating wealth. You could end up possibly dying with way more wealth than what you could have enjoyed during your lifetime. Typically the dividend yield, especially if you're just investing in like index funds, you're following a simple index fund portfolio, the dividend yield is probably going to be a lot lower than what you could realistically use in your retirement, in your financial independence. And this could cause you to, keep gaining your wealth and growing, exponentially still, even if you are living off of your dividends. This could be something that you want to do, but it might not be something that you really think about. You will lose all kinds of opportunity to just enjoy your own wealth, to enjoy enjoy living off of just a little bit more of your own wealth. So here's the example I'm going to present to you. I'm going to be using VTSAX, as we all know, the total stock market index fund that is offered by Vanguard. So with VTSAX, the most recent dividend yield was 1.93%. Now, theoretically, if we had $2 million invested in VTSAX, then we should receive a dividend of around $38,600 that year. Okay, so give or take. That's how much we would get if we were just living off of dividends based on VTSAX. But if we were using the 4% safe withdrawal rule, we would be able to withdraw a lot more than just what those dividends paid out. Even if we were using a more conservative number, that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use 3.5% because if you're retiring early, a lot of us like to use lower than the 4% rule, just to have a little bit more, of that security in there. So even at 3.5%, you're almost doubling what the dividends would have paid you. At 3.5%, you can withdraw $70,000 per year, and you can adjust upwards for inflation, and very, very most likely, you're not going to run out of money for many, many, many years. And also very, very likely, you're going to gain way more wealth, even on using 3.5% of a withdrawal rate. And you're going to spend almost twice as much. So that just goes to show you should have a balance between enjoying your wealth, actually using it, while of course we don't want to run out of money, especially when we're retired, especially when we're financially independent, but we do deserve to at least enjoy some of our money and use it to the best of our abilities to make the best life for ourselves. But as promised, I do want to point you to another video that is very similar to this video, but in a lot more detail, a lot more discussion here on why dividends are not the end-all be-all to retirement. Okay, and this is a video by Mr. Rob Berger. He has a really great YouTube channel. You should definitely check him out. No BS over there, just pure information, but really down-to-earth information, and you could learn a lot, as I have, from Mr. Rob Berger. So I'm going to put a link to his video in the description below. I'm going to put a link in the comment below. So definitely check out his video after this. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Zach from OnCashflow.com, and I hope to see you next time.